Just curious, what device are you watching on? Phone, TV, laptop? Comment below.
You ever have one of those moments that split your life into a clean before and after? I did. And what's worse, it came disguised as nothing more than a damn phone call on a Thursday afternoon, when the sun was soft through the windows, and I was folding laundry while trying to ignore the quiet lump in my throat that always settled in around this time of year. The holidays were circling the neighborhood like vultures, and I already knew what was coming. I just didn't expect the slap to be so direct, so polished, and so surgical. Elaine, my older sister, born 22 months before me and convinced that gap made her my mother, called right before 4. Her voice, sharp and confident like always, sliced right past pleasantries. "Hey Hannah, just wanted to check in real quick. So, we're keeping this year's family dinner kind of small, a more focused group. High achievers only. Mom and Dad thought it'd be a good way to keep things productive." I didn't even answer. For a second, I thought she might be joking. I waited for the laugh, the punchline, something sarcastic to let me off the hook. But she was serious. I could hear her sipping coffee, typing something, probably scheduling another leadership summit or Pilates session for her daughter, Ava, who apparently started speaking fluent Mandarin at 7. I stood there, holding one of Mark's old t-shirts, heart quietly breaking in a way that felt childish and pathetic, like I was still 10 years old and being left out of one of her science fairs because I like to draw instead of build things. Elaine didn't wait for me to respond. She kept going. "It's nothing personal, of course. We're just, trying to encourage the kids, surround them with success stories, motivation, you understand." And just like that, she hung up, offering some vague, fake-ass goodbye that sounded more like a courtesy than concern. I stood in that laundry room for what felt like an hour, t-shirt still in hand, staring at the floor like it might answer all the questions I hadn't yet formed. The part that stung the most wasn't the exclusion. I'd gotten used to that over the years. Being the one with the hobby, the one who just freelances, the one who never quite found her thing. It was the wording, high achievers only, as if I wasn't even in the conversation, as if my life, my work, my choices were somehow less than because they didn't come with office plaques, stock options, or a spouse with an executive title. Mark came home about an hour later. He saw it in my face before I said a word. "It's the dinner, isn't it?" he asked, already knowing. I nodded, told him what she said, down to the phrasing. He paced the kitchen the way he does when he's holding back. Wow, that's fucking cold, Han." I laughed, but it was hollow. "Yeah, well, it's Elaine. Nothing new." But it was new in a way. This was the first time she'd drawn the line in ink, made the separation official. Before, it was always implied. Subtle comments at Thanksgiving, backhanded praise. "You're so brave, doing your own thing," she'd say, with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. But this was different. This was a declaration. That night, I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because the sadness had been replaced by something else. Not anger either, just a sharp awareness, a stillness. I made dinner, Mark poured wine. We watched an old episode of Columbo and laughed at how smug the villains always were before their fall. Then, somewhere around 11:30, as I was scrolling through the news, half asleep, my phone buzzed. Not a text, not a call, a push alert, and it had my name in the headline. I blinked, thinking I was hallucinating, but there it was, plain as day. Author Hannah Branson signs landmark film deal, 120 Ellen for rights to the Cedar House series. My heart stopped. I sat up, clicked the article, read it twice, 3 times. They'd gone public early. My agent was supposed to give me a heads up, but apparently the studio had jumped the gun, excited to make the announcement. And there it was, my name, my work, my worth, plastered across every entertainment outlet in the country. Mark heard the gasp and sat up. What is it?" I handed him the phone, watched his face go pale, then bright. "Holy shit, Hunt, this is real?" I nodded. "I guess it is." He grabbed me by the shoulders, kissed me hard, and for a moment I felt it, the surreal warm swell of victory. But I said nothing. I didn't post. I didn't text anyone. I didn't gloat or scream or demand apologies. I just let it sit, because sometimes the loudest revenge is silence. By sunrise, my phone had over 50 missed calls and 70 unread messages. My parents, my cousins, Elaine, multiple times. All of them wanting to talk, needing to reconnect, suddenly remembering I existed. And I just smiled. Tell me this, have you ever been written off by the people who claim to love you most? Have you ever let that rejection stew, ferment quietly until it became something stronger than rage? Something more satisfying? Because let me tell you, that feeling, that calm before the confrontation, it's just getting started. There's a strange kind of silence that fills a house at midnight when something seismic has shifted in your world, but no one else has caught on yet. When you're sitting on the edge of the bed, half in disbelief, half in some altered dimension of clarity, staring at a screen that just told you your life has been rewritten, and yet all around you, the furniture, the walls, the clock ticking above the stove, all of it remains stubbornly the same. That was the silence I sat in after the news alert about my book deal hit the web. And though my name was suddenly on every entertainment feed in the country, my world was still my quiet bedroom, my sleeping dog, and Mark blinking at me like he was trying to process whether this was a prank or a miracle. For the first few minutes, I just kept refreshing the article, not because I didn't believe it, but because some irrational part of me thought it might disappear, like maybe someone had made a mistake, and it would all be gone in a puff of smoke once I blinked too hard. But it didn't disappear. In fact, within an hour, more outlets picked it up. Variety, Deadline, even CNN had a little blurb in their entertainment section. The figure was confirmed, $120 million. I sat there stunned not by the number, but by the realization that it was mine, not a gift, not a stroke of luck. It was the result of every late night, every client project I took on, just to pay the bills, every chapter I wrote in the back corner of that coffee shop with the busted air conditioner, every manuscript I edited under a pseudonym because no one wanted to publish a debut female author without a social media following or a glamorous backstory. Mark was pacing now, unable to sit still, grinning like a man who had just watched someone he loved finally get what she deserved after years of being overlooked. "You have to call your parents," he said, not because he thought they deserved it, but because he thought it would be therapeutic. "Or post something. Let the world know." But I shook my head. I didn't want noise. I didn't want confetti or champagne or applause. I wanted the silence to stretch a little longer, wanted to feel every inch of this moment alone before anyone tried to twist it, explain it, reduce it. By morning, everything changed. My phone was already buzzing before I opened my eyes. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails from numbers I hadn't seen in years. Elaine had called 3 times between 2 and 4 a.m. My mother had left a rambling message, equal parts congratulations and confusion, like she couldn't quite wrap her head around how this had happened without anyone telling her. My cousin Nora, who hadn't spoken to me since I declined to attend her MLM party 6 years ago, had sent a voice memo saying how proud she was and how she always knew I had something special. The hypocrisy was suffocating, and yet it also felt absurdly comical, like the universe was putting on a performance just for my benefit. I made coffee like I always did, fed the dog, opened my laptop and watched the analytics on my website go haywire. Thousands of new visitors, emails from agents I'd once begged for a chance, now begging me for a meeting. There was even a message from an old professor who once told me I'd probably never make a living off fiction, gently suggesting we grab coffee sometime soon to catch up. The layers of irony were so thick, I could have spread them on toast. Around 10, my agent finally called, breathless and electric. "It's real," she said before I even picked up. "They're offering full rights. Studio A is on board. The producer wants you on set." "This isn't just a deal, Hannah. This is the deal." I let her talk, let the words pour over me like warm water, and only when she paused to ask if I was okay did I finally respond. I'm good, I said, and it was the truth. I was better than good. I was calm. Later that day, I opened my text messages and scrolled through the long chain from Elaine. The first one came at 2:12 a.m. Wow, just saw the news, congrats. Followed by a longer one an hour later. We should talk. Let's clear the air. Maybe we underestimated you a little, but that was never the intention. Let's meet for coffee. And then in the morning, Mom says she's so proud, we all are. Let's catch up soon? I didn't respond. Not because I was trying to be cruel, but because there was something deeply satisfying about watching the same people who used to measure my worth in paychecks and degrees now scramble to make room for me at a table they once said was too full. I could picture them all sitting around that dinner table I wasn't invited to just days earlier, sipping wine, gloating about their jobs, comparing private school tuition rates and vacation homes, and now all of a sudden, they were the ones on the outside, peering into a world they didn't help build. And the best part? I hadn't changed. Not a bit. I was still the same woman who wrote alone in the corner of her bedroom, who edited wedding blogs for cash, who sent out pitches and prayed for a yes. The difference was, now the world had finally caught up. Revenge, when it arrives in silence, is the most elegant form of justice. Not a door slammed in anger, but one gently closed, locked from the inside, with curtains drawn. I sat on the porch that evening, wine in hand, watching the sun disappear behind the hills, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I needed to prove a damn thing, because sometimes the world turns. And when it does, you don't need to shout. You just let the silence speak for you. The morning after the so-called family dinner felt eerily calm in my house, a strange kind of peaceful that came not from serenity, but from resolution, like a battle had already been fought and won quietly during the night, and now all that remained was the cleanup of other people's regrets. The sunlight poured through the kitchen window in streaks, hitting the coffee maker just right, and for a moment, as I stood barefoot on the cool tile floor, spooning sugar into my mug, I had the surreal realization that I wasn't just waking up from something. I was waking up into something, into a new reality where the balance of power had shifted ever so slightly but permanently. And not because I had fought tooth and nail to take it, but because I had simply chosen not to play by their rules anymore. The first voicemail came from my mother, early as usual before the sun had fully risen. Her voice had that overly sweet tone she used whenever she felt guilty, but didn't want to admit it out loud, that sing-song warmth she'd weaponize like honey over a bruise. Hi, sweetheart, just saw the news. I mean, wow, why didn't you tell us? We're so proud of you, truly. Elaine was just saying last night that you've always had that creative spark. Even when you were little, remember? You used to write those little stories about the cat in the lighthouse. What was it called? Anyway, we'd love to celebrate with you. Let us know when you're free. I sat at the table, sipping my coffee, letting her words float around me like steam rising off the mug. And I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch, because it was all exactly as I expected. We're proud of you now that the world is watching, now that the figure is public, now that there's money, status, and headlines attached to my name. It wasn't pride they were feeling. It was panic, the gut-wrenching realization that they had dismissed, overlooked, and belittled the very thing that was now giving them whiplash. Next came the text from Elaine, far less warm, far more calculated. The first was short, "We should talk." The next longer, "I feel like there's some distance between us right now, and I'd love to clear the air. I'm sorry if the dinner situation came off the wrong way. It wasn't meant to be exclusive. It was just meant to keep things streamlined. You know how chaotic those nights can get. Can we have coffee?" It was textbook damage control, neat, polished, with just enough apology baked in to sound genuine, but none of the actual ownership that would have made it real. Mark, sitting across from me reading the news on his tablet, looked up when my phone buzzed again. "That's the fourth one from her," he said, more amused than annoyed. But there was tension in his jaw that betrayed how much he'd wanted this moment for me, not because of the money or the recognition, but because he'd sat beside me through every dinner I came home from crying, through every phone call where I played nice, even while swallowing insults, through every family event where I was treated like the odd one out, the sister who just couldn't quite get her act together. "They're not calling because they care," I said, finally putting my phone down. "They're calling because they need to be seen caring." Mark didn't disagree. Around noon, my publisher called. She was buzzing with energy, her voice practically shaking with excitement. "You should post something," she urged. "Not for the attention," she said, "but because the moment was important. Historic, even, and the readers, those loyal fans who had followed me from the beginning, deserved to celebrate too." I resisted at first, but then, with Mark's encouragement, I gave in and typed out a single, elegant line, one that said everything without saying too much. "Success tastes better when it's been slow cooked." That was it. No numbers, no gratitude post. Just a quiet knowing phrase that hit harder because it wasn't trying to. Within an hour, the post had exploded. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, writers, readers, industry folks, strangers. But among them, the one that stood out the most was Elaine's. "Proud of my little sister," she wrote publicly, like we were close, like this was just another milestone she'd always believed was inevitable. And just like that, the performance had begun. Her friends, her colleagues, even her husband chimed in beneath the post, all congratulating me, tagging Elaine like she'd somehow been part of the journey. It was surreal watching people rewrite the past in real time, spinning a narrative where I'd always been the family's best-kept secret, where my quiet struggle had just been a misunderstood success story, waiting for the right moment to bloom. I didn't reply. I didn't like her comment. I didn't delete it either. I just left it there, sitting in the light of its own falsehood, because sometimes the best way to expose someone is to give them all the room they need to pretend, and let the contrast speak for itself. That night, I took a long walk through the neighborhood, past the houses with their porch lights glowing like fireflies, past the one with the swing where I used to sit with my father as a kid, dreaming up stories while he reminded me to keep it practical when choosing a future. I passed all of it, the childhood, the expectations, the disappointments, and kept walking deeper into the quiet, where I could hear my own thoughts louder than the praise that had suddenly found its way to my inbox. Because the truth is, when you've been invisible to the people who are supposed to know you best, fame doesn't heal, it just illuminates. It shines a spotlight on every crack in the foundation, every moment they made you feel small, and forces them to squint through the glare of their own blindness. And when that light hits, they either cover their eyes or they start calling. But me, I wasn't answering just yet. It was 3 days after the post, after the flood of calls and comments and curious messages from people who had gone years without uttering my name, unless it was accompanied by pity or subtle disdain, when Elaine finally suggested a meeting in person. As though the wreckage of all those years could be swept into a neat little corner of a coffee shop, over a couple of overpriced lattes and an artfully arranged pastry plate. She picked the spot, of course, a sleek, sterile little place with white marble countertops, minimalist chairs that weren't meant to be sat in for long, and a chalkboard menu written in a font that tried too hard to look handwritten. It was the kind of place she'd love, a place where she could wear her carefully chosen cashmere wrap and pointed flats and blend right in with the other women who carried laptops but never opened them. I arrived 5 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because I wanted to watch her arrive, to study the way she would walk in, whether she'd look nervous or smug or polished to the point of suffocating. And I wasn't disappointed. She strode in precisely 4 minutes late, phone in hand, sunglasses still on, giving the hostess a smile that was just a fraction too forced, the kind of smile you practice in the mirror when you're about to do something you know you should have done long ago, but waited too long to say without it sounding rehearsed. She spotted me and waved like nothing was out of the ordinary, like we hadn't just flipped the dynamic of our entire lives on its head, like I hadn't been publicly excluded from a family event based on my perceived inadequacy, and then quietly vaulted to a level that none of them had ever reached. "You look great," she said, setting down her leather tote carefully placing her phone screen down on the table as though signaling that she was fully present, though we both knew she was waiting for a notification that would rescue her if things went south. "Thanks," I said, and that was it. I let the silence hang for a moment, not awkward, just full. She fidgeted slightly, ordered an almond milk cappuccino with a half pump of something and a gluten-free biscotti, and then finally leaned in, elbows on the table, fingers laced like she was about to deliver a verdict she'd already decided on. "So," she began, voice syrupy but measured, "I just want to say first, congratulations. Truly, I mean, this is huge. We're all just floored." I nodded. "Yeah, it is." She blinked at the firmness of my tone, maybe expecting something warmer, something that invited her in, but I offered nothing. She cleared her throat. "Look, I know things have been tense, and I want to make sure we're not harboring resentment or misunderstanding." I raised my eyebrows slightly. "Misunderstanding?" She smiled like I'd confirmed her worst fear. "Okay, maybe that's not the right word. I just think the dinner thing might have come off wrong. It was never meant to exclude you. We just thought, well, I thought, it would be good to keep the gathering focused. On the kids, on motivation, you know?" I leaned back, my fingers tracing the rim of my cup, and let her sit with the weight of her words before I responded. "And you decided I wouldn't be a good motivator?" She flinched, but quickly recovered. No, not like that. I mean, your path has just been different, less linear. It's hard to explain, but at the time, we didn't think you'd be comfortable. We thought it might be awkward for you." There it was, the truth. Not that they thought I wouldn't fit in, but that they'd decided I wouldn't belong. They hadn't excluded me to protect me. They'd excluded me to protect their version of success. Their narrative where I was the lovable, eccentric underachiever who floated on the margins while they discussed mergers and promotions and summer programs for their overscheduled children. "I see," I said quietly, but not softly. "And now that I'm less awkward, I'm allowed back in?" She looked away for a second, and then right back, forcing the eye contact. "Come on, Hannah, you're being unfair. You know I've always supported you." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the delusion was so precise, so complete. I leaned forward, not to intimidate her, but to be closer when I said the next part. "No, Elaine, you didn't support me. You tolerated me. There's a difference. You tolerated me at holidays because it would look bad not to. You tolerated my writing because it was a harmless little passion. And you tolerated my silence every time you condescended to me, every time you made me feel like a guest in my own family." Her mouth opened slightly, some rebuttal forming, but I stopped her with a small lift of my hand. "I didn't say anything then. I didn't push back. I let you talk. I let all of you look at me like a cautionary tale while you smiled through your Chardonnay and bragged about Ava's GPA. But here's the thing, Elaine. When you write someone off for long enough, you forget that they can still turn the page." Her face had gone pale now, not from anger, but from a dawning realization that I wasn't just angry, I was done. She reached for her cappuccino, took a long sip, then tried one last time. "We're family, we can fix this." I nodded slowly. We are family, but not all family needs to be repaired. Sometimes it just needs to be reorganized. I stood up, pulled a 20 from my wallet, and dropped it on the table, not for her, but for the server who had politely ignored the tension. As I walked out, I didn't look back. I didn't rush. I didn't check my phone. I just walked through the door and into the late afternoon sun, knowing that I had said everything I needed to say, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with the quiet authority of someone who finally understood her worth. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't rage. It's clarity. It came 3 months later, slipped into my inbox on a Tuesday morning that felt no different from any other. The kind of ordinary day that doesn't warn you before it brings the past back to your doorstep, wrapped in polished pleasantries and paper-thin sincerity. The subject line read simply, "Family dinner, hope you can make it." And though I already knew what it contained, Some part of me still opened it with the detached curiosity of someone thumbing through an old yearbook, not looking for nostalgia, but to remember exactly how far they've come from the pages where they used to feel invisible. The invitation was dressed in all the right words: warm, inclusive, overcompensating to the point of absurdity. We're doing something different this year. Less structured, more casual, just good food and great company. Everyone's invited. We want to celebrate family and all the incredible things we've all accomplished this year. It was signed by Elaine, of course, but CC'd to the entire extended family. Like some corporate memo attempting to appear heartfelt by virtue of exclamation points and faux informality. There was a list of attendees: cousins, in-laws, children, even the ones who used to barely acknowledge my presence unless they needed a +1 for their side business schemes or a free edit on their resume. They were all going to be there, and now so could I. The irony was so thick I could practically taste it in my mouth, because 3 months ago I wasn't even considered worthy of sitting at their table. And now I was being extended a public performative gesture of inclusion. Not because they had changed, not because they had suddenly recognized my value as a person, but because I had become useful again, relevant, a name that drew attention, clicks, and admiration from people they wanted to impress. It wasn't an apology, it was a strategy. I didn't respond immediately. I let the email sit, let it marinate among the rest of the digital noise in my inbox, and each day that passed without a reply seemed to fray the edges of Elaine's control just a little more. A week later, she texted, "Hey, did you see the invite? We'd love to have you. Ava keeps asking if you'll be there." That last line was bait, of course, and it nearly worked. But I had learned over the past months how to distinguish between real bridges and those hastily built from desperation and crumbling pride. What they didn't understand, what they never understood, was that I didn't want revenge in the way most people did. I didn't want to show up dressed to the nines, dripping with success and smugness, soaking up their forced compliments while silently basking in the reversal of status. That would have made it about them. That would have turned my victory into a reaction, and I was done reacting. So I didn't go. I didn't write back. I didn't call. I didn't explain. I simply chose not to show. And in doing so, I reclaimed a kind of power that doesn't require volume or spectacle, just quiet certainty. On the night of the dinner, I drove past the house, not slowly, not in dramatic hesitation, but at a pace that said I was on my way to somewhere else, somewhere that didn't require me to shrink or explain or prove anything. The windows were lit, laughter spilled out onto the lawn, and parked outside were the same cars I used to admire as markers of arrival, back when I thought material meant achievement. But now they just looked like props in a play I no longer needed to audition for. In the passenger seat of my car sat a sleek envelope, thick, weighty, with a gold embossed crest stamped on the front. Inside was a formal invitation to the premiere of the film adaptation of The Cedar House, my book, my name in print on the ticket, alongside A-list actors and producers I used to only read about. It wasn't just a ticket, it was a symbol, a door I had built myself, brick by brick, from rejection and persistence and silence. The kind that doesn't just open, but redefines the very architecture of where you belong. As I drove, I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to fit into a family mold that was never shaped with me in mind, trying to find ways to soften my voice, hide my ambition, smooth out my edges, so I wouldn't make others uncomfortable. And I realized that the greatest peace I had found in this whole journey wasn't in the deal, or the fame, or the premiere. It was in the decision not to walk back into a room where I had once been told, in no uncertain terms, that I wasn't enough. Some doors, once closed, aren't meant to be reopened, not because of bitterness, but because of growth. Because once you've outgrown a version of yourself that needed someone else's validation to feel worthy, the rooms you used to fight to be in start to feel too small, too dim, too full of ghosts who never clapped for you when it mattered most. I didn't attend the dinner, and I didn't regret it. The next day, my phone buzzed with more messages, more follow-ups, Elaine even calling to say she hoped I was okay, that everyone had missed me, that they'd saved me a plate and wished I could have made it. I didn't answer. Not because I was trying to be cruel, but because I had finally learned the difference between peace and performance, and I had no intention of ever performing for them again. That night, in a city far from where I grew up, I walked into a premiere wearing a dress I had bought on a whim, with no designer label, no stylist approval, just something that made me feel strong and real. I stood beneath lights I used to imagine only in my most far-fetched dreams, surrounded by people who didn't know my past but respected my work. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just someone who had arrived. I was someone who had built the road there. And while my family sat around a table pretending things hadn't changed, laughing too loudly and remembering me only when they needed to feel modern or forgiving, I walked forward into a life they didn't write, into a future they didn't see coming, and into a version of myself that no longer waited to be invited. Because some dinners aren't about food or family or tradition. Sometimes the most powerful seat at the table is the one you choose not to take. And that, in the end, is the kind of silence that says everything.